Hi, everybody, and welcome to Heel Heat. My name is George Coles, and on this episode, we're doing Who Was Better. Topic for this Who Was Better? Triple H versus Mick Foley. Two men who really helped define the late 90s, early 2000s in WWF, now WWE. Two men who had a storied rivalry together. Two wrestlers that I think are looked back on rather fondly. With all that being said, if you haven't seen any of these before, I grade everything on 1 to 5 scale, 1 being the worst, 5 being the best. There are 8 separate categories. At the end, we're going to total up the points. There is a chance for bonus points at the end, and we'll talk about that when we get there. But first up, the first category, technical wrestling. Now for Triple H, I'm giving Triple H a 4. While I don't think he ever got to the level of a Bret Hart, an Eddie Guerrero, or even a Shawn Michaels, I think he was very good, and he could construct a match in a way that really didn't need much technical ability. He was a brawler a lot of times and liked to mix it up. Now, that doesn't mean he couldn't do it. He did do it, and he did do it on a good scale, just not quite on that upper echelon. Now, for Mick Foley, no matter which face of Foley we use, Mick's getting a 3. Let's be honest, Mick is not known for technical wrestling at all. He's known for his willingness to put his body and life on the line. He's known for crazy stunts, I guess you could call them, whether going off the top of the Hell in a Cell or the dangerous but somewhat overlooked elbow drop to the floor that he did in almost every single match. I think Mick himself would tell you this wasn't his forte. I wouldn't say he was bad at it because there were times, especially if you look back at his anti-hardcore run in ECW, where he didn't imply some of it and he did good, but I would say he's right in the middle of the pack, giving him a 3. Next up, striking. For striking, I'm giving Triple H a 4, and he's just below that elite level in this category. While I consider Triple H a brawler for most of his career, I feel there are things that draw him back in the striking aspect, and a lot of it has to do with the sledgehammer. The way he just cupped the sledgehammer, it was just weird. No one would hit like that. If you're not going to use a sledgehammer like a sledgehammer would be used by real people, don't use it as a weapon. I know Sting did similar things with the bat, but he also would swing a bat like you would swing a baseball bat too at times. If Triple H would have just swung the hammer like a hammer is meant to be a few times, I would think it would be better. And that's not the only thing. He had at times where his punches, you could see through them a bit. Whereas Mick, I think Mick was actually just hitting people, because you barely ever seen a hole between Mick's hand in your face when he would hit you. For Mick, I'm giving Mick a 5. I think he's just a bit better. I would put him in that top tier of brawlers, a top tier of striking wrestlers. I put him right up there with like a Stan Hansen or a Stone Cold Steve Austin once he transformed into the Stone Cold character. I put him up there at the top. His strikes looked legitimate. Not to say that Triple H's didn't, he was just that level just below. Next category, how they perform as a heel. Now this is where Triple H takes a high mark. Triple H gets a 5 in this. I know at the time and even now there was somewhat a stigma on the Reign of Terror, and yes, there were some bad decisions made, but I don't know that all of that was on his part. Some of that probably had to do with his father-in-law, specifically the Booker T decision. Booker T should have beat him at WrestleMania. But if you look at his body of work, whether it be the Connecticut Blue Blood, whether it be the McMahon-Helmsley era, Evolution, I think he was an excellent heel. He definitely had that part of being the top level heel in the WWE for a very long time. And yes, I know there was a lot of backlash to it, but I think a lot of it was unjust. I think if the public didn't know he was dating or married to Stephanie McMahon, or if he just would have been dating or married to anybody else, I think wrestling fans would have looked at it more fondly. I personally rather enjoyed his work as a heel. That's why he gets a 5 from me. Now going to Mick. Mick's getting a 4. The reason that Mick gets a 4 here and not a 5, because I do think he did some excellent heel work, especially the anti-hardcore ECW stuff, which I know I keep bring up. Even at his most dastardly, as Cactus Jack with Kevin Sullivan, or the anti-hardcore stuff, or the corporate mankind, Mick was still lovable. There was something that the fans connected to, even when he was a bad guy. Now, that doesn't mean he didn't play his role well, he wasn't good at what he did, he was an excellent foil for someone like Sting early in his career, but for me, I don't think Mick would have ever been the top-level bad guy like Triple H got to be. I think he was very serviceable and he worked as a main event bad guy, but I don't think he ever would have been the top of the company bad guy, like a Triple H or a Ric Flair when he was a world champion, or Roman Reigns recently has. So for me, he is just below that, basically a B-plus player. Next up, how they perform as a babyface. Now this is going to flip it. Triple H for this is going to get a 4. While I think he was good, especially during the DX run, again, I don't think he reached that upper echelon. I don't look at him as a face as I would a Stone Cold, as I would a Rock, as I would with a Dusty Rhodes. I don't think he was a guy that had that capability. Now, when he was a heel, he definitely did. And I think he worked better as a heel. And yes, as a face, especially part of DX, he had some of the most memorable moments of the era. But if you look at his time as a face, there was always another face ahead of him in the pecking order. Now for Mick Foley, Mick is getting a 5. Mick is one of the most beloved baby faces of all time. He's someone that the fans absolutely adore. I've never met a wrestling fan who doesn't at the very least respect Mick Foley. And for the very most part, they all love him, including me. He is probably my favorite wrestler of all time. I'd put him right up there in the mix with Roddy Piper and Raven. The three of them are probably my 3 favorite wrestlers that's ever done it. CM Punk is up there as well. He's just so lovable. The fans gravitated to him, especially during his Mankind run, his 3 World Championship run. Mick is just awesome. That's why he gets a 5. Now, next category, promos. Triple H is getting a 5. And yes, I know the complaints about Monday Night Raw, starting with Triple H talking for 20 minutes and blah, blah, blah. Yes, I get that. It became old for me too. It became formulaic for me too. But it was working. Fans were tuning in. Fans were wanting to see what he said. Whether you hated him or loved him, you wanted to see what he was going to say. Triple H was always a good orator and had a good way of pulling you into his matches, pulling you into his storylines, whether that be a total goof as part of DX or being totally serious as part of Evolution, whether it was being a pompous jerk or a sophomore jackass. He always brought you in with his promos. Trips is getting a 5. For Mick, Mick gets a 5. There are very few wrestlers in the history of the sport that I would consider a better promo than Mick Foley. Especially, and I know I keep going back to this, if you look at Mick Foley's work as Cactus Jack in ECW, he cuts some of the best promos of all time. Look up the Kane Dewey promo. I think it's still on YouTube, and if it's not, you could probably find it somewhere. That's one of the best promos I've ever seen. Just listen to the inflection in his voice. Listen to the way he talks. Mick could make anything good. He can make anything funny. He can make anything serious. There's a reason why he went on to be a multi-million book-selling author and a #1 bestseller several times over. He's just that talented of an orator. That's why Mick gets a 5 on his promos. Now, next category, presentation. For Triple H is getting a 5. Whether it be DX in a Jeep, or him coming out with a throne, or the Terminator look, or even back to the extravagant robes of Hunter Hearst Helmsley, Triple H's presentation was always top-notch. He always had amazing music, whether it be Time to Play the Game, King of Kings, My Time, DX theme. Even his Connecticut Blue Blood Hunter Hearst Helmsley theme I thought was a good theme. Not on the level of his others, but still good. I mean, Triple H looked the part of a pro wrestler, looked the part of a main event wrestler for most of his career. He was presented exactly how he should have been. That's why he gets a 5. Now for Mick is getting a 4. And I know, bring it on. The reason for this, while he had some iconic looks, whether it be the cactus look with the Wanted Dead shirt, or the Dude Love with the tie-dye, or the Mankind mask and the tattered work shirt. Nothing really stands out. Can you think of a special Mick Foley entrance or special Mick Foley gear? The guy wore sweatpants 99% of the time, or, leopard print boots. I mean, I love Mick. I just said that he's one of my favorite wrestlers of all time. But he never had that special presentation. He never had that Stone Cold coming out on a four-wheeler. He never had that Ric Flair with the expensive robe. He never had the Dusty Rhodes coming out to Prince's Purple Rain, which happened. Go check it out. I know for a fact that's on YouTube because it came up in the algorithm recently. Mick was just presented as Mick. And let's be honest, Mick kind of looked like a unhomed person, to put it in a very nice way, and not much unlike what I look like now. I don't think I have a great presentation. Look at this. I mean, I've got a scraggly beard. My hair is all over the place. I'm wearing a Leaping Lanny Poffo t-shirt. So I understand Mick's look. I just don't think it was that top tier. And going to our next category, charisma. For charisma, I'm giving Triple H a 4. Again, I keep bringing this up, and I don't want it to sound like I'm being negative on Triple H, because I think he's very good. And a lot of his categories he excels in. He really excels in. For me, though, he was in there with a lot of hard hitters. His era had the likes of Shawn Michaels, The Undertaker, Mick Foley, Steve Austin, The Rock. Then you go over to WCW with guys like Sting, Goldberg, Ric Flair, Kevin Nash, Scott Hall. And when you look at all those guys, and again, this isn't a knock on Trips, but you put him and stack him up against his era, he's a B to me. And I know it sounds a little bit harsh, and a 4 really is a really good score. I mean, I'm not Dave Meltzer. I'm not giving anybody 7s here. So this would be a very good, I mean, if you were a parent and you were grading this as a scorecard, you'd be very happy that your kid brought home a 4. On the other side, Mick Foley, Mick gets a 5. Everything I said about how beloved he is and how much he connects with the crowd, he's the everyman, kind of like a Dusty Rhodes would be. Someone that you want to root for no matter what, against the odds, the underdog story, the Rocky story. Mick Foley is all of that. He's all of us. He's the fans. He came up as a fan, and we knew that he was a fan. And he didn't hide anything from the fact that he was a goofy kid that did backyard wrestling, which all of us could relate to, whether you did actual backyard wrestling and through matches, or you just grabbed your brothers and sisters and cousins or best friends and suplexed them in your bedroom onto your bed, or body slammed them, or hit them with a DDT, or any of that. We all did that. So we all could relate to Mick. We could all relate to being the guy that nobody wanted to be a champion, becoming a champion. For that, Mick had an ultimate charisma. I would say he's one of the most charismatic wrestlers of all time. Again, he gets a 5. Last but not least, big game performance. How they handle the highest of pressures, your main events of pay-per-views, your main event storylines, being the guy that's considered to run with the ball. For this, I'm not going to beat around the bush. They both get 5s. I mentioned it with Triple H's longevity, which takes a lot into this. He's kind of old reliable. You can always put the belt on Triple H and it's always going to work. Mick Foley may not have had as long of a run at the top, but his run at the top, he always delivered. You could say the most memorable moment in wrestling history and ask any wrestling fan what that is, and there's a heavy majority of them are going to point to Mick Foley going off the cell at Hell in a Cell at King of the Ring. That might be the single most iconic moment in the history of wrestling. So much so that, without looking, can you name the main event of that show? Because that wasn't the main event. Can you tell me what it was? I know what it was because I recently watched the whole thing a few months back. But anyway, when given the ball, both these guys ran with it. Both of these guys were stellar. That's why they both get a 5. Now going into their totals, for Triple H is getting a 36. For Mick Foley also gets a 36. They're all tied up. But wait, remember I told you about the bonus in the beginning. If you haven't seen this, every Wednesday I put on the community page here on my YouTube channel a poll, and basically it's for the next video I'm going to record. It asks you, who as the fans do you think is better? In this case, you had 2 choices, Triple H or Mick Foley. Whoever won the poll gets 5 bonus points. We've had times where that has brought somebody from behind to a win. We've had times where it's made a blowout win even bigger. For this one, it's going to break the tiebreaker. With over 600 votes, I think you can all guess who won this. Mick Foley, aka Cactus Jack, aka Mankind, aka Dude Love. I kind of knew that Mick was going to win the poll just on the popularity part of it, and I kind of knew where this was going to go going into making this. But if you look at it, and you look at it objectively, these guys are very evenly matched in a lot of ways, where one has got a little bit of a deficiency, the other is strong in that. That's why they made such great opponents. The match where Cactus Jack made his WWF debut, and they do the thing on the screen with Mankind and Dude Love talking to each other, and both of them saying they're not going to fight Hunter Hearst Helmsley. They have a special opponent for him, and that's Cactus Jack. And just the way that Triple H sold that, and how Mick helped Triple H's career and helped bring him into that main event status. Their match at the Royal Rumble in 2000, just a fantastic, fantastic match. Their Hell in a Cell match was great, or I might be getting that backwards. The Hell in a Cell and the Street Fight were both great. They're both 2 months right after each other. Whichever it was, they were both awesome. But these guys were amazing opponents. That's why they made for such a great story for this. That's why I picked them here. I hope you enjoyed this. Again, Mick Foley picks up the win here. I think you all wanted that. It's pretty obvious by the blowout win on the poll. But anyway, my name is George Coles, and you've been watching Who Was Better.